This podcast is brought to you by North Carolina's electric cooperatives.
This is NC Spin, an unrehearsed discussion on issues of interest to North Carolinians. Now, here is your moderator, Tom Campbell.
Welcome to Balanced Debate for the Old North State. We hope you rested up over the Easter holiday because we've got a full agenda for you. We begin by asking our panel to discuss a new program called Restart that gives low-performing schools in our state more flexibility. UNC President Margaret Spellings has just completed 2 years on the job, and we talk about a performance bonus given her. We have a prison crisis in our state, and we debate how we can fix it. And of course, we won't stop until the panel tells us something we don't know. Speaking of said panel, let's welcome this week's analysts. They include Howard Lee, former state senator and former chair of the State Board of Education; Chris Fitzsimom, columnist and political analyst; Becki Gray with the John Locke Foundation; and Bob Orr, the former Supreme Court Justice. Well, we begin our uninterrupted debate after these brief messages from our underwriters.
Life's busy, but you're in control. As an electric cooperative member, you have access to lots of tools to help manage your home energy use and budget, so you can focus on what's most important.
Quality of life enjoyed by North Carolinians comes from the sacrifice of our state and local government retirees. These men and women risked their lives in times of danger. They taught our children, kept our neighborhoods clean, and protected the state's resources. They are North Carolina's silent heroes. The North Carolina Retired Governmental Employees Association proudly serves as the voice for more than 300,000 retirees across North Carolina. Our retirees deserve no less, and every day we stand by them.
For many years, North Carolina has struggled with what to do about low-performing schools, those schools that don't achieve as much as others around them. We're now undertaking a program called Restart, somewhat similar to charter schools, in that these low-performing schools are going to have more flexibility and fewer regulations with which to deal. They can arbitrarily decide to extend the school year, school day, use funds in different ways, have more flexibility in hiring teachers and teaching methods. Howard Lee is the former chair of the State Board of Education and someone who is now head of a foundation working directly with schools in our state. What's your opinion of this new Restart program?
Well, I think it's a new name that's being overlaid on an old continued problem, and that is that while they give flexibility to the schools, many of these schools have had flexibility all along, especially in the office of the principal. I'm concerned that we're completely missing the boat unless we're willing to completely flip the educational pedagogy on its head and change how we are instructing and educating kids.
So you're saying it's not rules and regulations as much as it is the actual instructional...
instructional process, and that, of course, starts and stops with the principal at the school and keeping teachers in the classroom for an extended period of time.
Chris, a low-performing school is defined as a school that scores a D or an F on the annual evaluation that it receives. And student achievement that's less than expected for 2 out of 3 years. There are currently 500 schools in North Carolina that fit into that category, and the list is growing every year. Why?
Well, that's a good question. We need to figure it out. But one thing we do know is that between 95 and 97% over the last few years of the schools that have a D or an F are schools with higher than 50% of their students who receive free and reduced lunch. That's based on the formula that we use to give schools a letter grade. So if you're a low-performing school, if you're a low-income school, and you dramatically improve, you could still have a D or an F year after year after year because all the numbers keep going up. There's been Republican...
And that part of it is weighed more heavily.
It's 80% of the grade, and we've had Republican House has passed a bill saying it should be 50-50. We want you to get to a certain level, but we want to reward your growth and hard work and achievement. And the Senate has refused to even take that up. The House even put it in the budget one year. So part of the problem, I don't disagree with Senator Lee at all, but part of the problem we have is how we categorize these schools. There are a lot of them where kids are making progress and they still get a D or an F, which hurts the morale at the school, hurts the parents' view of the school, hurts how the teachers view themselves, and I think we need to change that.
Becki, the Department of Public Instruction, talking about low-performing schools, I mean, one of the things that comes to mind, obviously, is we got to come in here and reinforce and help that school perhaps more than we do other schools. Department of Public Instruction says we don't have the money for that. We're not given extra appropriations for that significantly enough to make any difference. Should they?
Well, Tom,
Should the legislature give it to them?
Well, that depends on, do you need the money and what do you need it for? Some of these things like the Restart program that you're talking about giving those low-performing schools more flexibility in the way that they use the money that they're getting, funding things in different ways, as you mentioned, different curriculum, hours, all of those kind of things. That's not a big appropriation difference. It's just a different way of managing school. So I think that, I'll push back a little bit on the premise of your question. The answer to improving education is not always, do we need more money, or if we just spent more money, we would get better results. It's what can we do? And I think the Restart in these, giving low-performing schools, as Senator Lee mentioned, more authority to do things that they need and putting the power into the hand of the principal to spend the money they're getting the way they need is where we need to start with this.
Well, I was just going to jump in and say, but spending less is the answer, and we're spending less per capita on students when you adjust for inflation than we were in 2008. So we can argue maybe we don't need to spend a ton more, but we don't need to spend less.
Well, let's talk about this subject of flexibility, Bob, because that seems to be the big buzzword in education these days is flexibility. This Restart program, as Howard says, it really is not new. It's just got a new name. It was actually part of the improvement project, which was initiated by our friend Jerry Hancock, who was one of the litigants in the Leandro lawsuit, as well as 10 superintendents across the state. What they did is they said, okay, what are the obstacles in the way of these low-performing schools, and what can we do to try to overcome these obstacles? Flexibility was a large part of what they came up to. From your standpoint, how important is flexibility?
I think flexibility is a critical component. The whole concept behind charter schools was to experiment with ways to better educate our kids, but then move those things that did succeed into the broader public school system. But I have to say, take a little bit of an exception with Becki on the resources. Many of these schools are in low wealth communities and counties, and they need
a large number of them.
Yes, and they need resources to attract really good teachers. We got to figure out why they're low performing.
Let's talk about some of that flexibility. Howard, you're getting ready to say something. I'll let you say it in just a second. But part of it is giving these schools, these individual schools, more flexibility as far as hiring teachers. The teachers don't have to be certified in the subjects. How big a problem is this licensure problem so far as recruiting teachers?
Well,
particularly lateral entry.
Yeah, it's really not that big of an impediment on being able to succeed in educating kids. That's the difference between the charter school and the so-called Restart school, is that the Restarts must have certified teachers, and the charters, of course, do not have to. But let me be very clear. There are a lot of leaders out here in our schools that don't even use the level of flexibility that they already have. And, of course, some of them are running up against a stone wall when they go out and try to hire teachers. And they, like in one school I work with, they brought in 5 high-level math teachers in the school year, and before 3 months were gone, all 5 of those teachers had left.
Wow.
So,
why?
Because the circumstances, the environment, and they just feel like they're working against an uphill battle trying to educate kids that are really kind of slow. I wish I were educational czar, because the first thing
I wish you were too, as a matter of fact.
The first thing I'd do is eliminate grades.
We can vote.
But at any rate.
Becki, one of the other topics they're talking about in this flexibility is the ability to be able to control the school calendar better, particularly as it relates to the beginning of the school year, the end of the school year. Craig Horn in the North Carolina House of Representatives every year introduces legislation to be able to give schools more flexibility. It always gets beaten by the leisure and hospitality industry. Why shouldn't schools have more flexibility?
I think they should, and it's not just starting date and ending date, but what about flexibility for the school week? One of these Restart schools, at least one of them, have changed the school week where there are extended hours Monday through Thursday. Friday is a shorter day for the students, gives teachers a built-in planning day to regroup, meet within themselves, mentor, get geared up for the next week. So if that works better for your school, why not have that flexibility? we talk about the school calendar, we think of start and end dates, but there's a lot. Think of all the flexibility that you can do within your school day.
Well, the only problem with that is if you've got 3 children and they're in 2 different schools, and one of them starts the school day at 7 a.m. and the next one starts at 9, and they don't work, they don't have class on Friday. I mean, it does get to be complicated.
It gets complicated, but Tom, I think we need to quit trying to design a school system that is convenient and one that really works for outcomes of kids, and focus on that.
So, Bob, this Restart program, we got 104 schools that are in it right now. There are 14 more awaiting approval from the State Board of Education. This looks like it's getting ready to be sort of a snowball down the hill avalanche that we're forming here. And it's still a very early thing. Very quickly, I want to go around and ask everybody, what's it going to take for us to know whether it's working or not?
Well, we're going to, whether the kids coming out of these schools perform adequately on tests.
Well, that's going to take several years, isn't it?
Sure. I mean, this is moving the Titanic in incremental ways, not in some quick turnaround.
Quickly, Becki, what do you think?
To this point, any of those changes, we need to keep the data. It's too early. This is relatively new. This is too early to have the data to know really to make those measurements and make clear. But I think it's significant that this started with 5 schools. As you mentioned, it's now 104. We have 14 that are in the queue. So school administrators, principals, people who are doing this, I think that's a sign they want the flexibility.
Chris?
Well, we're going to know in the test scores again, but it's going to take a long time. I want to say quickly, one of the things I think we need to shift is start talking about how to help these schools and start thinking about how to help these students. If you talk to people who run community schools, they'll tell you heartbreaking stories of kids who've never seen a dentist and people think they're stupid, or kids whose glasses don't work,
and on and on and on. Howard?
But I mean, but that's part of what I wish we could give these schools flexibility and resources to make sure every kid in that class somehow somebody's helping him or her find appropriate care.
Howard, what's your response?
I would measure by one standard only, and that is keeping teachers in the classroom for an extended period of years. And I think if you can do that, you can see obvious and very quick results coming, as I have seen in one school in Durham where I had a great principal and he was able to cut down on teacher turnover, and the test scores of these kids have gone up.
David Brooks wrote a column, I don't know whether you read it a couple of weeks ago or not, but he was talking about the keys to success in schools, and he mentioned that the principals were really the primary key to success. And he said, for a principal to be really effective, they've got to have 4 to 7 years in that school. The problem is the average principal leaves after about 3 years because of what they have to put up with.
And keep the local school board out of his hair.
Yeah.
Because that to me is one of the great impediments of our school.
And the office.
And giving more flexibility to those principals may very well be the key to keeping them in the schools.
Final question in this subject, this business of flexibility. If we think it is such a good idea, and it seems to be one that is getting a lot of buzz, if we think it's such a good idea, why not give every school in North Carolina the same flexibility we give our charter schools, Howard?
Hear, hear. I've always preached that song, and I'm saying that song, and I certainly believe that would be a major step forward, and it will commit to the fact that we are really serious about wanting to
we could probably save some money in the Department of Public Instruction too, couldn't we?
Well, and another thing I would do, and this is probably going to upset some people, but I would take a real close look at whether or not busing isn't impacting the educational experiences of many of our children.
And this is the one thing, by the way, that these Restart schools have to provide is busing.
Absolutely.
What do you think? Why not give them all flexibility?
Well, I think flexibility.
Don't we trust them?
Well, I think we should trust them more, but I also think flexibility sometimes replaces the investment. I think we need both. You can't say, here's flexibility. You don't need any more resources for these kids who are struggling, just a lot more flexibility. No, you need both. You need to figure out a way to reach these kids and help them and their families.
Becki, why not give it all?
I think we should, and I think we should treat principals as CEOs of these schools. And to Chris's point, the focus needs to be on the outcomes of the kids in the classroom managed by really good teachers.
Bob, it looks like we can fix these school systems.
Absolutely. Creativity comes out of flexibility. And creativity is how you solve these kinds of problems.
And it may be different in each school.
True.
Talking about education, UNC President Margaret Spellings recently observed her 2-year anniversary of leadership at our university system. She started with controversy over her hiring and had to deal with a sports scandal, a legislature not pleased with the system's progress, and most recently with a maverick board that is interested in getting involved in the running of the system and making great changes. her own evaluation of her first 2 years that she's pleased but not satisfied with what she's accomplished. But the UNC Board of Governors gave her a $95,000 bonus. Even that was met with opposition inside the board that strongly disagreed with it. Bob Orr, board member Tom Fetzer was one of those who opposed publicly this bonus, saying Spelling makes $775,000 a year. Taxpayers shouldn't have to add another $100,000. And he says, how can the system talk about reducing cost in education when it gives administrators large bonuses? Your take on this?
Well, it's a big job that Margaret Spellings has. She's, by all accounts, done an exceptional job in her first 2 years. And I agree, it's a lot of money. But when you look around the state at Tom Fetzer's alma mater, Wake Forest, the president of Wake Forest makes $4 million a year. You go over to the athletic side, we have basketball and football coaches making $2 million a year. So to me, putting it in proportion, what she's getting paid for managing a 17-member system with a very diverse and different group of schools. 17
chancellors, 17 boards, and a board of governor, and the legislature. Yeah, there you go.
Yeah, it's a big job.
I don't know that I'd do it for that amount of money. Howard, your take on this, though?
Well, I tell you, $775,000 is a lot of money. And that's probably among the highest paid public university leaders in the country, if not, and certainly in the state. I think Margaret has done a fine job leading the university during her first 2 years, but I don't think giving a bonus at this time is in the best interest of our education system. Number one, it sends a terrible message down the line to faculty members, many of whom are leaving because they feel they're underpaid, and they're going to private institutions. We cannot compare private institutions with public institutions in terms of the money they pay when we look at the tuition.
Chris, should public employees have performance bonuses?
Well, I think it should be some part of evaluation. My issue with this is I think $775,000 is a lot of money. But I think you could argue, and Bob, I thought, did effectively, that she might deserve that much money. The bonus is the question, I think, in giving, when we're losing faculty, as Howard mentions. I don't think a lot of people in North Carolina are having a $95,000 a year bonus, but I will say this, she's having put up with a board and a legislative leadership. The Senate leadership, it's no secret, did not want her to get the job in the first place, and some of the appointees on the board still don't want her in that job.
She had opposition from the legislature. She had opposition from her own board, not some of the members of the board. And she had the faculty and students.
Many members, it's worth remembering, many members of the search committee that picked her as incumbents ran for re-election and were not picked by the legislative leaders because they were mad that she was hired in the first place.
Let's get back to that sort of rogue board that she's dealing with right now. I don't think we've ever, in all the years that we've seen this, and I remember Bill Friday telling us when that 32-member board was originally constituted, he didn't like it, and for some of these same reasons. But back to this Board of Governors, they seem to be much more proactive, Becki, than what we've seen in the past. In fact, it looks like they want to meddle in the operations of the university instead of setting policy. Is that an accurate read?
I think that's probably an accurate read, but this is a different board. This is a different time. This board moved forward with the hiring of Margaret Spellings, with some changes within the university system, that they were going to ask questions. I think there's been a history on the Board of Governors of they just kind of approved anything that was put before them when you have different leadership. You mentioned Bill Friday, not a lot of controversy. This is a different board. It's a different time. They're challenging. They're disruptive. They're asking questions. It is different. You're right. I don't think we know now whether it's better or worse. I think Margaret Spellings is doing an outstanding job.
Well, she's got 3 more years left on this contract, and frankly, with all that she's dealing with,
it's hard to manage.
I'm just wondering, is she going to stay the whole 3 years, or do you think you might just throw up her hands and say, it ain't worth it?
I don't think she's that kind of leader. I think that, she is one that is committed to this.
She was George Bush's Secretary of Education.
This is a tough lady. I don't think she's going to throw her hands up.
However, that she's very frustrated not that the board is all Republican, she's a Republican, and the past board that put her on there, but the new members of the board, Fetzer and Rucho and these guys, have been openly critical of her, have been trying to take away her authority inside the system. It's not a secret in Chapel Hill that she's very frustrated.
And Bob, that is something that is new from that standpoint. Typically, if there have been squabbles inside the Board of Governors, we hadn't heard much about it. They're going public.
It's been very public.
Yeah, this is a much more political-oriented board, certainly in the newest members. But if anybody can handle it, Margaret Spellings can. And I think she's a great advocate for each of those campuses and for those faculty members and staff people. So the optics of the bonus may be a problem, but if not her, who would we have?
And I think you have to go back to, what kind of job is she doing? What does our university system look like? Graduation rates are up, tuition is down, college education is more available to more North Carolinians than it ever has been.
Need to move on, if you don't mind. 2017 was the deadliest year in our North Carolina prison system, both for prisoners as well as guards. We had roughly 37,000 inmates in our prisons, and we're told about 5,000 are behind bars 23 or 24 hours a day. More than 1 in 5 reportedly has mental illness, and we've got staff shortages of 25% or even higher in some of our prisons, more leaving the job than are being recruited to work because they won't accept the $32,000 a year salary because of risk. And morale is at an all-time low. Lawmakers are screaming to get something done. Chris Fitzsimom, Secretary of Public Safety Eric Hooks, stated the obvious in saying that our prisons are dangerous places filled with dangerous people. But we've got a prison crisis right now in North Carolina. Where do you get started trying to fix it?
Well, this would be, I would hope, and we've done this in our past in North Carolina, that we would be able to convene some sort of, in the long term or medium term, some sort of bipartisan commission to really look at this, look at what other states do, come up with recommendations. It's very complicated.
The legislature has one.
Well, I know, but we'll see how bipartisan it will be in the end. And what I'd like, there's several things. First of all, we still have a lot of nonviolent people who shouldn't be there in the first place. And we've made some progress in North Carolina in doing that. Secondly, you mentioned, think about doing that job for $32,000 a year. And why does it only pay $32,000 a year? You should be double that just to start in those jobs. And thirdly, we have to figure out a way to keep these places safe. And mental illness is a big issue you also raised. We're still struggling in North Carolina to deal with. The prison system is our largest mental health facility, which a lot of the people shouldn't be there in the first place.
But it shouldn't be.
That's exactly
From that
right.
standpoint,
That's my point.
Secretary Hooks, Bob, says that what you've got in our prisons in many instances today is you've got a bunch of mean people mixed up with sick people. And no wonder we got the problems we've got. But it raises this question that Chris has just mentioned of mentally ill. Our state just has a dismal record in performance in treating mentally ill.
We have done a poor job, and the critical thing is that we invest resources on the front end so that people aren't being funneled into the criminal justice system and the prison system who really early on could have been diverted and helped in other kinds of programs.
Howard, just pouring more money into our prisons, that ain't going to fix it, is it?
That's not going to fix it, because we made a bad mistake when we decided to adopt private prisons years ago and started piling a lot of people into these prisons that are now transferred into these more public institutions. But that's not going to fix it. I agree with Chris. First, we got to start looking at what we're paying personnel to go in and take a risk. And third, I think we need to think seriously about getting some people out of prison who don't need to be incarcerated.
And preparing those to re-enter real life as they are transitioning from prison
back into
what we're doing
regular
is just
training them to be better criminals.
But there's a movement, and it's happened in some police departments in North Carolina. But what we also have, there's a lot of people who end up in prison in the first place are mentally ill people who police don't know how to handle or law enforcement don't know how to handle. There are training programs. Some jurisdictions have them, some don't. Some places in the country have made big progress keeping people with mental illness out of prison in the first place. That's not the only answer. It's a small piece of a complicated puzzle.
Talk about the mentally ill. You talk to our sheriffs in North Carolina. They'll tell you the problem that we're running into. All right, got to transition now to the time of the show when we ask the panel to tell us something we don't know. Chris Fitzsimom.
The State Republican Party announced one of its keynote speakers at its convention in June is Corey Lewandowski, who was President Trump's former campaign manager, who's been interviewed by the Intelligence Committee, a special prosecutor. I'm not making a prediction, but it wouldn't be shocking if he ran into some legal trouble. I thought it was the weirdest message to send when you have Republican governors, Republican members of Congress around the country who are well admired. You have Mitt Romney, who's running for the Senate, who a lot of people know and like who are Republicans. To pick Corey Lewandowski as a keynote speaker at the State Republican Party convention, to me, is a complete head-scratcher.
All right. I thought it was Lewandowski.
Lewandowski, right.
Lewandowski. All right. Howard Lee, tell us something we don't know.
Well, I want to take a little bit different turn and remember a friend of mine by the name of John Ely. Some people may know that he passed away this week, but the reason I want to highlight him is he left a legacy that is going to serve North Carolina well. The creation of the North Carolina Fund and the North Carolina School of the Arts, both of which have become national models.
Wow. All right, Bob Orr, tell us something we don't know.
President Trump just fired the head of the Veterans Administration. He's going to appoint his personal physician to that position. A friend of mine who's retired military, spent a lot of time both in the military and post-military working with the VA, says it may well be the system is fundamentally broken and needs to just be
Maybe we need
scrapped.
a restart for that. We got 30 seconds. Becki Gray, tell us something we don't know.
Tom, we've talked a lot about on the show of the urban-rural divide and how to bridge that. In North Carolina, 31 counties do not have an OBGYN doctor. One way to get that care into those counties may be to loosen the regulations on midwives and let them practice in some of those 31 counties and bring prenatal and maternity care
We're going to do a show
to
on
many of
rural.
our
Patrick
patients.
Woody at a forum recently, very articulate. Well, you've heard our spin on the issues of the day. To stay informed all during the week, give your feedback, and read my weekly column, be sure to visit our website, ncspin.com, or catch NC Spin on Facebook. And be sure to join us next week when we'll have more balanced debate for the Old North State. Until then, stay informed and watch out for the spin.
Life's busy, but you're in control. As an electric cooperative member, you have access to lots of tools to help manage your home energy use and budget, so you can focus on what's most important.
Quality of life enjoyed by North Carolinians comes from the sacrifice of our state and local government retirees. These men and women risked their lives in times of danger. They taught our children, kept our neighborhoods clean, and protected the state's resources. They are North Carolina's silent heroes. The North Carolina Retired Governmental Employees Association proudly serves as the voice for more than 300,000 retirees across North Carolina. Our retirees deserve no less, and every day we stand by them.
North Carolina Channel is made possible by the financial contributions of viewers like you who support the UNC TV network.